The government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds.
No. Hello, friends. John Papola here. I'm back in my office, and once again, it's Friday, and I want to try to not make sense of the whole world, but try to make sense of the week. I thought I'd focus on a video that's really exploded on X/Twitter recently. Jared Bernstein, who's the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and it appears to be from a recent documentary. The clip is really outrageous, and so let's watch through this together and talk about it.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves?
So just real quick, that's Stephanie Kelton. She's an economist who advocates, maybe the leading advocate for what's called modern monetary theory, MMT. The sort of left of center econ Twitterverse is on fire about this idea. And so that question's sort of a pregnant question because she's asking a question that cuts to the whole thing that she advocates for.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well,
and here comes Jared, one of the highest ranking economic advisors in the federal government, advising the president.
Again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds.
Not off to a good start. This is the first part that's weird, and you can see why this clip has gone viral, because that statement's actually completely reversed. So what is a bond? That is a piece of paper that the government issues in exchange for money. So the government issues bonds to the public so that it can raise money to spend it that it doesn't have. That's what a bond actually is. The bond is the debt contract. Bonds are debt. They're an asset for you, and they're debt for the issuer, which is the federal government. I just want to make sure I heard this right. So let me just go back.
Some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money,
Yep.
and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money.
Okay, the government's the lender. Who's the borrower?
Definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds.
No. It doesn't lend that money by selling bonds. When you sell the bond, you get money. So issuing bonds and selling them is the government borrowing. So Jared's actually got the fundamental mechanism of public finance wrong in this interview. Let's keep going.
Is that what they do?
No,
it's
not.
They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah.
Yeah. So now he reversed. He got it right now. So he was getting tripped up. And okay.
So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money and then it uses that money to, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, cause it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
So, okay, I want to first do a couple things. So earlier this week, we released an episode of Dad Saves America with Peter Boghossian. At the heart of what Peter does is tries to help people understand how we think and how we come to hold beliefs and to challenge them. I think one of the ways we can check our own thinking is to not be so quick to snap into our camp. And so my camp thinks Jared Bernstein sort of sucks because I'm a free market guy. And I watch this clip and my first reaction is, this is why the country is screwed. Our government leaders don't know how the most basic function of governments are working. They don't know how treasury bonds work. They're tripping over themselves. How can this be happening? And obviously 14 million plus people agree. As a filmmaker, I want to let you in on something though. This is a snippet of a very long sit-down conversation. I don't know how long it is, but when you make a documentary, you sit down for sometimes hours and then clip pieces out to assemble your story. I'm going to guess that this set of questions is embedded in a much longer conversation about what the modern monetary theorists think we should do instead of what we currently do. And what I understand, they're saying, look, forget the federal deficit. The deficit and debt don't matter. They have no impact because the federal government can just print all that money. So the federal government is not really in debt because it can pay itself back. And if you and I were able to do that, that would be awesome. Like if you had your mortgage and you could simply run your Epson printer and hand your mortgage, your bank, the full balance of your mortgage, well, obviously that would be awesome. And so that's basically what the modern monetary theorists are saying our government should do. It should cease borrowing from people or other governments and other entities who have dollars, because why take dollars from China when you can just print your own dollars? And that's an interesting question. If you don't take a couple extra steps and ask yourself, well, what actually is this for? So Thomas Sowell has this great way of thinking about economics. He basically says, you got to ask yourself continually, what next? And then what happens? And this is where this philosophy completely breaks down. Okay, so the US government stops borrowing money. It just tells the Fed, print the money we need, and just spends it. So then the supply of these dollars keep going up. And the way they keep going up is that the government prints the money, goes out and buys the services that it wants and gives the money to the people that are politically connected. That's what happens. That's literally what's going on. In exchange for nothing. There was no exchange. Nobody created anything first. When the government taxes you or I and takes our income, there is an actually underlying exchange that this represents, and that is the work we did, the services we provided to other people. But if you can print them, and you're the only one that can, you get to take from the supply of value, available talent, the physical materials, the labor, the capital, the goods. You get to take that for your use, which is scarce stuff. There's only so many experts you can go out there into the marketplace and hire. And you're competing with other people to hire them. So you're going to go out there and hire them. That means that person is coming to work for you instead of working for somebody else. So if the government has the monopoly to print money and then spend it to do what it wants, and it can spend more than it takes in taxes, that means it can literally
consume the wealth of society and shrink it.
Unless the government is creating enough value with that activity to sort of replenish it. And this is where the fundamental disagreement, I think, between sort of free market people and sort of pro-government, like more socialistic people, comes into play. They believe the government is really good at doing that, is really good at creating value for others. And I don't think that's true. I don't think the evidence is on their side. You might disagree, and that's a debate worth having. But there's something more profound about this effort when it comes to MMT than the debate over whether government is good at marshaling resources to create value for its people. I personally think government mostly moves money around, largely from young working Americans to old and sick Americans, and builds bombs and drops them on people. I think that constitutes most of the federal government's spending. I think that's actually a statement of fact. So color me skeptical that we should have them be able to grab whatever resource they want in the society simply by printing money and spending it. But that's not actually the thing about this theory being promoted in this clip under the surface and in the movie that it's based on. What it's really saying is the government should be able to do this in the most dishonest and insidious way imaginable. And I want to read a little bit from maybe one of the most influential and famous left of center economists in the past 150 years, and that's John Maynard Keynes.
John Maynard Keynes. I want to steer markets. I want them set free.
In 1919, a book he wrote called The Economic Consequences of the Peace was published. It was the aftermath of World War I. During World War I, almost immediately the Fed just basically starts doing MMT. It prints money and gives it to the federal government to fight the war. prices go crazy because it's bidding up the scarce resources in American society with the money that's being printed. And in that aftermath of that massive inflation, writes Keynes, that this is deeply insidious. And he notes, Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of the citizens. You don't have to take my word for it about what inflation is. This is John Maynard Keynes laying it out for you. And by this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. The sight of this arbitrary rearrangement of riches strikes not only at security, but also at confidence in the equity of the existing distribution of wealth. So we saw this happen with COVID. And government actually did two things in this instance, right? It told us all to stop doing things, which meant a collapse in actually creation of new stuff. And then it printed a ton of money and just basically distributed it directly to all of us. It suspended the need for payments of things. It issued actual subsidies to all kinds of people. And what happened as a result? We didn't get wealthier. Prices went through the roof.
Hey, listen, party at the Fed.
And they're basically still doing that today in the form of the amount of debt they're borrowing. So they're borrowing money like crazy to consume more resources. But when you print it and you induce inflation, what you're really doing is you're secretly stealing the purchasing power of the people who hold these. That is what is being done. So we don't want the government to do that because it's taxation through another means. It's not some special magic. It's just taxation dishonestly and undemocratically, frankly. Think about this for a second. We use the term capitalism. It actually came from Marx. But what capital actually is, in terms of Adam Smith, was stored labor. I go to work, I get paid, and then I put it in my savings account, and it is my labor stored to be deployed later. So that is what money helps us do. If you just print it and spend it, you didn't labor over anything. And those advocating for that are basically advocating for magic. And how do I know that's true? Because if you sell everything you own, everything, and you've got all your cash, and you go to the bank and you say, I need this all in cash, get it moving. They're going to have to call people. They don't have that much paper at any given time. You put it all in a suitcase and you go to a deserted island. And you say, okay, this is it. I'm super wealthy. I sold everything I've got. I've got $200,000 or whatever. I've got $50,000. It doesn't matter how much. You could have $10 million. You go to that desert island, you are poor. The only thing you can do with that money is burn it for warmth. And this is how profoundly our understanding of economics, which is just to say, how do we get the most out of the material, time, and effort we have in coordination with each other? That's all economics really is. That's how fundamentally it's broken down, that this is not understood. And that this clip, it just cuts at the lack of understanding at every level, all the way up to the Council of Economic Advisors. So there's so much more I can talk about on this front with y'all. I hope this was actually helpful or useful. And I look forward to engaging you in the comments and hope you'll have a great weekend.